The CEO took his disabled mother to the office, but what his secretary did made him fall madly in love. No one noticed when he walked in until they saw the wheelchair. Whispers started, eyes followed. No one knew who she was or why he suddenly cared. And while the whole company kept their distance, one person stepped closer. What she did next? It didn't just break his walls. It uncovered a secret he'd buried for years. Some people said it was just kindness, but for him, it was the start of something much deeper. Before we continue, if you enjoy touching and inspiring stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Now let's get back to the story. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. People turned. Conversations stopped. The glass walls of Cole and Vale Enterprises echoed with silence that felt heavy. Because standing there, under the cool white lights of the 42nd floor, was the one man no one dared to question, Damian Cole, and beside him, in a wheelchair, was a fragile older woman wearing a faded pink cardigan and a knitted shawl draped gently over her lap. No one had ever seen her before. No one knew the CEO even had a mother, and no one expected him, the man known for firing people without blinking, to be wheeling her through the glass hallway like time itself had stopped. The air was stiff with confusion. Whispers started, then got swallowed by the tension Damian carried with every step. He didn't speak. He didn't look at anyone. He simply guided the chair forward with both hands, his jaw tight, shoulders rigid beneath his tailored cobalt blue suit. And then, for the first time since he'd walked into this office 4 years ago, he paused in the middle of the hallway. He turned slightly to the nearest staff member, a junior intern who looked like he might faint from being addressed, and said in a low, almost human voice, "Where is Grace?" The boy stammered. Miss Mitchell is in your office, Mr. Cole." Without another word, Damian resumed moving, pushing the wheelchair forward. The woman in it, Margaret Cole, smiled faintly, her thin hands clasped in her lap. Her body leaned slightly to one side, the result of a long and quiet stroke 3 years prior. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed everything. People made way, like parting water for something ancient and sacred. Grace Mitchell was standing by the window, organizing Damian's reports when she heard the firm knock. It wasn't his usual one. It was slower, hesitant almost. Before she could answer, the door opened, and for the first time in her 2 years as his secretary, Damian didn't enter alone. Grace froze mid-step. Her green eyes landed on the delicate woman in the wheelchair. She saw her first, the soft lines of age, the gentle tremor in her fingers, and then looked up at her boss. He looked different, not tired, not angry, but something deeper, like he hadn't slept in years. Like he had held something in for too long, and now that it was finally exposed, he didn't know how to carry it anymore. "Grace," he said, his voice low, "this is my mother, Margaret. She'll be staying here with me today." Grace blinked once. Then, without hesitation, she crossed the room. She knelt beside the wheelchair, gently took Margaret's hand, and said with genuine warmth, "It's so nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Cole. You raised a very strong man." Margaret's lips curved, soft, slow, into the kind of smile only a mother could give. Damian didn't move, but something in his chest shifted. Grace stood up, adjusted a pillow behind Margaret's back without needing to be asked, then glanced at Damian. "Should I cancel your afternoon meetings?" He shook his head. "Keep them. I'll work from the glass room. Just make sure she's comfortable here." Grace nodded. Of course. As Damian stepped away, he didn't say it out loud, but his eyes, sharp and unreadable as they always were, held a flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected anyone to touch his mother's hand, especially not Grace, especially not like that. Later that morning, the office buzzed with speculation. People whispered by the elevators, speculated in the cafeteria. Is she sick? Did something happen to her? Why bring her here of all places? And yet, in the center of it all, Grace never left Margaret's side. She made her tea, adjusted the blinds when the light was too harsh, even changed the background music from classical to jazz when Margaret blinked softly at the new rhythm. Not once did Grace look annoyed, not once did she hesitate to help. Meanwhile, Damien sat behind the glass wall, watching without watching. His meetings went on, his calls continued, but behind every sentence he spoke, there was a distraction in his tone, a memory, a weight. It was nearly 4 p.m. when Grace gently rolled Margaret into the balcony room where sunlight warmed the marble tiles. "I hope you don't mind the breeze," she said kindly. Margaret's hand twitched slightly. A soft squeeze of approval. Grace smiled. "You're welcome." As she stood beside her, sipping a small cup of coffee, she whispered, without looking, "I don't know what your son has been through, Mrs. Cole, but I can tell he's carrying something alone. And no one should have to do that forever." From across the hallway, Damien saw her, standing beside the woman he loved most in this world, speaking to her like she was still here. Tears stung his eyes before he could stop them. He turned away, but the silence behind his eyes was no longer empty. It was filled with something new. That night, as the office cleared out, Grace began packing up her desk. She checked on Margaret one last time, covering her with a light blanket. Just as she turned to leave, Damien's voice stopped her. "Grace." She turned around. He looked at her, not like a CEO, but like a man searching for words he never learned to say. "I saw what you did for her." Grace didn't blink. "It was nothing." "It wasn't," he said quietly. And then after a pause, "She doesn't speak much anymore. Some days, not at all. But today," she smiled. "That hasn't happened in weeks." Grace's throat tightened. She nodded. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones left unsaid. Then Damien added, more softly than ever before, "Thank you." She opened her mouth to respond, but didn't get the chance. Because just then, Margaret stirred in her chair, and something in her hand dropped onto the floor. A small, folded photograph. Grace bent down and picked it up, but when she opened it, her heart skipped. It wasn't a photo of Margaret and Damien, it was Damien standing alone at a small white gravestone. His face was younger, his arms tense at his sides, and scribbled on the back in faded ink were the words, "June 9th, 2017. Grace held the photograph delicately, afraid even her breath might ruin it. The edges were frayed, like someone had folded and unfolded it too many times. The colors had faded with time, but what remained was undeniable. A younger Emily, no more than 6, smiling in a faded snapshot from 2012. Her curls wild, her eyes bright. The last picture ever taken before she disappeared. Grace's heart raced. She looked up at Damien, waiting for him to speak, waiting for some kind of explanation. But his face had gone completely still, like time had frozen, like something inside him had just snapped tight, a string pulled too far. He walked over, took the photo from her hand with more care than she expected, and stared at it. Then he closed his eyes, and for the first time since Grace had known him, he looked afraid, not of her, not of what she'd seen, but of what remembering it might cost him. "Who is she?" Grace asked softly. There was no judgment in her voice, no accusation, only the kind of curiosity that comes from truly caring. Damien exhaled, long and slow. He didn't look at her when he said it. "Someone I should have protected." Grace's eyes searched his face, but he turned away. He walked slowly to the edge of the room and stared out the window, city lights starting to blink into view far below. Grace stayed near Margaret, stayed near, her heart aching for a pain she didn't even fully understand yet. Damien's jaw tightened, his shoulders rigid. For a long time, he said nothing. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost breaking. "I was 18, and she was just a child." He didn't say more, but the silence that followed told Grace everything she needed to know. He turned around. Believing Emily was gone broke her first. The stroke just finished the job. Grace swallowed hard. She couldn't imagine it, losing a sister, watching his mother fade, then becoming the cold, perfect CEO the world expected. "Why bring your mother here?" she asked gently now. Damien glanced at his mother. She was still resting, her head tilted peacefully. She started calling my name in the middle of the night, screaming sometimes. The nurse said it might be psychological, that maybe seeing me during the day would help. He paused. I didn't know what else to do. And there it was. The truth behind the mystery. The cold, ruthless CEO wasn't ruthless at all. He was just lost. The next morning, word had already spread. The company group chat had exploded with wild theories, but Grace didn't care. She walked in early and brought Margaret fresh lavender tea in a china cup she'd found in the executive lounge. She fluffed the pillows, wheeled her gently to the window, and opened the blinds. Damien walked in 15 minutes later and stopped when he saw them. Grace kneeling beside his mother, softly brushing her silver hair back with quiet affection. He'd never seen anyone do that before, not even the nurses. Margaret smiled, a full one this time. "Morning, Mom," Damien said. Margaret blinked slowly, and her lips parted. A single word slipped out. Ely. Damien froze. Grace looked up at him, unsure. "I think she mistook me for your sister," Grace whispered. But Damien's face had changed, not in anger, but something else. Like he was holding back a memory so painful, it threatened to break him in front of both of them. He said nothing, just turned and left the room without another word. That afternoon, Damien was colder than ever. Meetings were short, answers were clipped. But Grace understood. Walls built over years don't fall down in one day. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about what Margaret had said. Emily. The name floated in her mind for hours. She typed it, then erased it. She looked up Damien's old college records. Nothing. No obituary, no newspaper clipping, almost like the girl had never existed. Why would he hide that? Why keep it secret? That night, after everyone had gone home and the office lights dimmed, Grace stood by the elevator with her bag on her shoulder. The doors opened, and there was Damien, again pushing Margaret in her wheelchair, ready to go. But this time, he stopped. "Can I give you a ride home?" Grace blinked. "You don't have to." "I want to." The way he said it made her heart skip. Not smooth, not charming, real. She nodded, and just like that, the cold, guarded CEO opened the car door for her, waited until she buckled her seatbelt, and drove quietly through the glowing city streets. They didn't speak much. But somewhere between the red lights and soft music playing on the radio, something shifted. For the first time, Grace didn't feel like she was working for Damien Cole. She felt like she knew him. He dropped her off near a small cafe by her apartment. Before she stepped out, he spoke. "I don't let people get close to me." "I figured," Grace said gently. He half smiled. "You're the first person who ever asked about her." She hesitated, then whispered, "And what would she say if she saw you now?" Damien looked out the windshield, and then he said something she didn't expect. "She'd say I've become everything I used to hate." Grace's breath caught. She opened the door slowly, stepped out, then leaned down to meet his eyes one last time. "You haven't. You just forgot who you were." Then she walked away into the night, her red blouse glowing under the city lights. And Damien sat there for a long time, staring into the empty passenger seat where his sister used to be. Auntie. 3 days passed. Damien Cole arrived at the office every morning precisely at 8 a.m., and each time Margaret was with him, bundled in a soft blanket, eyes drifting between the clouds outside and the quiet hum of the building around her. Some employees adjusted quickly, others whispered behind closed doors. But one thing had changed. No one dared question it anymore. Not after seeing the way Grace stayed by Margaret's side, day after day, without complaint, without show. She'd become a gentle shadow, present but never intrusive, and slowly, Margaret responded. Her eyes tracked more, her head tilted when someone spoke. She even chuckled once, faint, like the sound of old wind chimes. Grace noticed every flicker. She began bringing in soft scarves for Margaret, matching them to her own outfits, so the older woman always felt a little dressed up. She placed a flower on her desk each morning, a new color, a new scent. Small things, but Damien noticed, and that was what scared him most. It was Thursday evening when the moment came. Margaret had fallen asleep in her chair, a light shawl tucked under her chin, soft jazz playing from a corner speaker. Grace was typing something on her laptop, finishing the last client proposal of the day, when she heard it. At first she thought it was a whisper. Then she turned and saw Margaret's lips moving again, very softly, almost like a dream. Grace. Grace froze. Her name had slipped from Margaret's lips like a memory long buried. "Mrs. Cole," she said, gently touching her hand, "can you hear me?" But Margaret's eyes were closed. Her fingers rested still. She hadn't woken up. She was just dreaming, but dreaming of Grace. Grace stood in silence, heart pounding, confused, touched, a little scared. What did it mean? The next morning, Damien walked in earlier than usual, blue suit crisp, expression unreadable. He looked at Margaret first, still resting peacefully near the window, then at Grace, who sat beside her with a book open in her lap. He almost turned to leave, but then Grace stood. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly. He looked at her. "What is it?" "She said my name yesterday, in her sleep." That made Damien stop. She said, "Grace?" "Yes, clear as day. She wasn't awake." "But she said it like she remembered me." Damien's lips parted slightly, a flicker of hope lighting his eyes. "She hasn't remembered names in years." "I thought maybe," Grace hesitated, "maybe that means something's changing." He didn't respond at first. Then, after a long pause, he whispered, "She used to love people. She was warm. She used to dance in the kitchen with Emily, even when we had no music." Grace smiled, picturing it. "She still has that warmth," she said gently. "It's just quiet now, buried." Damien nodded slowly, then looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his gaze shifted. Admiration, yes, but also trust. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. During lunch, Grace wheeled Margaret into the garden terrace, a rarely used rooftop spot hidden behind the building's glass tower. It was quiet, breezy, filled with sunlight, and just enough green to feel like the world beyond business still existed. Damien, having stepped out from a tense board meeting, found them there by accident. He saw Grace holding a spoon, gently feeding Margaret warm soup she'd brought from the little cafe across the street. Margaret was calm, her eyes clear. Damien stepped closer, surprised. "She ate?" he asked. Grace nodded. "Half the bowl," his voice lowered. "She hasn't done that in a year." Grace smiled at him. Maybe she just needed the right view. Or the right person, Damien thought, but he didn't say it. Instead, he sat beside them, loosened his tie, and did something no one in the company had ever witnessed. He leaned back. He breathed. As the sun began to dip behind the skyline, Margaret stirred again. She turned her head slowly, eyes on her son. She reached out, barely a movement, but enough for Damien to notice. He took her hand, cautiously. And she whispered something he hadn't heard in years. "You were always trying to protect everyone, even when no one asked you to." Damien's face went pale. "Mom?" he whispered. She blinked slowly, her hand tightened around his. "I'm proud of you." And just like that, she slipped back into sleep. A tear slid down Damien's cheek, not in grief, but in relief. That night, Grace was about to leave when Damien approached her by the glass elevators. "Grace?" She turned, surprised by how close he stood. He hesitated, then handed her a small, folded envelope. Inside was a photo. It was the same one from before, of him and Emily. But this time, Grace saw something else tucked behind it. A letter, written by a child, scrawled in uneven, colorful handwriting. "To my big brother Damien, thank you for always holding my hand when I was scared." Grace looked up at him, tears filling her eyes. "She left it in her school bag the day she passed," Damien said. "I haven't shown it to anyone before." Grace folded it carefully, holding it like something sacred. "You don't have to carry all of this alone," she said, her voice trembling now. He looked at her like he wasn't sure what to say, like he'd never been given permission to let go before. Then, barely above a whisper, "Will you have dinner with us tomorrow night?" Grace's breath caught. "Just us three?" He nodded. "Mom would like that." Grace smiled, heart pounding in her chest. "I'd like that too." But neither of them knew that someone else had been watching through the glass all along, someone who didn't like how close Grace and Damien were becoming, and that person had just made a call to someone who used to know all of Damien's secrets. Friday evening came with a gentle breeze and the sound of soft jazz floating from the speakers in Damien's penthouse. Grace stood in the entryway, a little breathless, not because of the stairs, but because she'd never been here before. The place was stunning. Elegant but not overdone. Sleek floors, warm lighting, large windows that bathed the room in gold as the sun dipped behind the city skyline. But what caught her attention wasn't the view or the furniture. It was the smell of something cooking in the kitchen, something homemade. She walked in slowly, heels clicking softly, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in brown paper. Damien met her at the door. No suit tonight, just a dark blue button-up rolled to his elbows and charcoal slacks. Still crisp, still every bit Damien, but softer. He paused when he saw her. Her hair was tied loosely back. A simple pale blue dress hugged her figure gently. She wore no jewelry except for a delicate silver bracelet. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then he broke the silence. "You look—" She smiled. "You too." He stepped aside to let her in. Margaret was already waiting, seated comfortably in her favorite blanket and soft slippers, her hair brushed and tied back with a ribbon. Grace's ribbon, actually, the one she'd left on the desk a few days earlier. Grace knelt beside her and handed her the flowers. "These are for you." Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for them. A smile formed, small, warm. "She likes blue," Damien said from behind, watching the moment unfold. Used to say it reminded her of peace. Grace gently placed the bouquet in a vase and looked up at him. "Then I'm glad I picked right." Dinner was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Damien had made pasta, fresh from scratch. Grace was surprised. She didn't think he even owned a stove, much less knew how to use one. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked, twirling a forkful of linguine. "My mother," he said simply. Before she got sick, Friday nights were pasta night. No matter what was going on, we sat down. No phones, no work. Grace glanced at Margaret, who was now dozing slightly after her meal, a content look on her face. "She remembers," Grace said quietly. "I think some part of her always did." For a long moment, they both just sat there, breathing in the quiet, the safety, the strange comfort of something that felt almost like family. Grace met his eyes. "And did it?" He shook his head. "Turns out, the higher you climb, the lonelier it gets." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper, "until someone reaches out." And for the first time in a long, long time, he smiled, not the tight, practiced CEO grin, but something real. Just as Grace was about to help clean up, the buzzer rang. Damien frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone." He walked to the front panel, checked the small screen, and stiffened. Then his hand slowly dropped to his side. Grace tilted her head. "Everything okay?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed the intercom button. Let her up. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and in walked a woman Grace had never seen before. Tall, polished, raven black hair in a tight bun. Designer heels, sharp blazer, sunglasses pushed up on her head. Every movement calculated. "Hello, Damien," she said coolly. Grace instinctively stepped back. Something about the woman's tone wasn't just cold, it was sharp, familiar in the way people sound when they've hurt someone before. Damien didn't move. "Vanessa." Grace's chest tightened. "Vanessa. His ex. The one nobody dared talk about in the office." "I wasn't aware you were back in town," Damien said, voice hardening. "I wasn't," Vanessa replied, strolling in like she owned the place, "until someone told me you've been bringing your mother to the office and having cozy little dinners with your secretary." She turned to Grace, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Grace, is it? Cute name." Grace stayed silent, but the tension in her shoulders gave away everything she was trying to hold in. Margaret stirred softly in her chair, but still slept. Damien stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Vanessa and Grace. "What do you want?" Vanessa smiled, her tone sharp but almost rehearsed. "Just wanted to see how you were holding up. Thought maybe you could use someone who really knows you." "I'm fine," Damien said flatly. She arched a brow. "You sure about that?" Her voice dropped, low and biting. "Because last I checked, the Damien I knew never cried. He built empires and burned anyone in his way." Grace flinched. Damien's eyes darkened. "That Damien is gone." Vanessa took a step closer, but for the first time her confidence cracked. "You think I came here on my own?" she whispered, a faint tremor in her voice. "I got a call. Someone wanted me to remind you who you used to be." Grace finally spoke, steady and clear. "I think you should leave." Vanessa laughed lightly, recovering her mask. "You think?" "I do," Damien said, his tone like steel now. "And if you ever show up here again uninvited, I'll remind you what it means to be cut out completely." For a split second, something flickered in Vanessa's eyes. Bitterness? Regret? Or maybe fear? It passed quickly. She adjusted her purse. "Be careful who you let close, Damien. Sometimes kindness is just another way to get to the throne." Then she walked out without another word. The silence that followed was deafening. Grace stood frozen, unsure of where she fit in now. Damien looked at her, really looked, and took a slow breath. "I'm sorry," he said. "You don't need to apologize for your past." He shook his head. "No, but I do need you to know she wasn't wrong about one thing." Grace tilted her head, heart sinking. "I've pushed people away," he said, "even the ones who didn't deserve it." Then he stepped closer. "But I don't want to do that with you." Grace's breath caught. Neither of them moved, but the air between them changed. A heartbeat. A pause. And then Margaret stirred sharply. She sat upright, eyes wide, mouth trembling. Both Damien and Grace rushed to her side. "Mom?" Damien whispered. But Margaret was shaking now, lips moving without sound, eyes brimming with panic. And then, barely audible, "She may be in danger and doesn't know it." Grace's eyes widened. "Who?" Margaret's voice cracked. "Emily. She's not safe." And then, just like that, she fainted. Margaret's body slumped forward, her lips pale, her breathing shallow. "Mom!" Damien shouted, catching her just before she slipped from the chair. His hands trembled as he gently cradled her, the blanket falling to the floor. Grace had already called 911, her voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos. She just collapsed. Yes, unresponsive, but breathing. "We're at the Cole residence, 172 West Elm, please." "Hurry!" Damien held his mother close, his face torn open with panic. Grace had never seen him like this, not at the office, not in moments of quiet grief. This was raw, helpless. And as Margaret's trembling fingers clutched his wrist in a sudden flicker of movement, She rasped something again, so faint Grace had to lean in. "She's not safe." "They lied." Damien froze. His heart pounded against his chest. Who lied? But Margaret's eyes had already shut. Her body went still again. The words hung in the air like smoke, unsettling, heavy. Grace looked at Damien, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think she's talking about Emily?" Damien didn't answer. Because he wasn't sure anymore. The ambulance came fast. The paramedics were gentle, professional, quiet. Grace rode beside Margaret while Damien followed behind in his car. He didn't want anyone else seeing him like this. Not scared, not uncertain, not broken. At the hospital they ran scans, stabilized Margaret's vitals, and finally allowed Grace and Damien into the waiting room. The doctor said it was a stress-induced seizure, not uncommon for stroke survivors. She was stable now, but needed rest. Observation. No more stimulation. Let her mind rest, the doctor said. Sometimes it's not about memory loss. It's about memory overflow. What her body forgot, her heart hasn't. Those words stayed with Damien. Memory overflow. What had his mother remembered? What had she never really forgotten? Hours later, Damien sat in the hallway, head in his hands. Grace approached with 2 coffees, one in each hand. He took it silently. Their fingers brushed. For a moment, neither of them moved their hands away. It was nothing. It was everything. She was scared, Grace said softly, sitting beside him. Whatever she remembered, it wasn't peaceful. Damien nodded slowly. When she said Emily wasn't safe, I thought she was just confused, but now... His voice trailed off. Grace leaned toward him, careful with her words. You don't have to carry this alone. For a long moment, Damien said nothing. His jaw tightened, his hands clasped together. Finally, his voice broke through, low, unsteady. Her name was Emily, my sister. She was 6 when I lost her, and after that, nothing was ever the same. His words lingered in the air, heavy and raw. Grace felt her chest tighten, her hand aching to reach for his, but she didn't. Instead, she let the silence hold them for a moment, a silence that carried all the weight of the years he had never spoken about. The hallway seemed still, too still, and as Grace stepped away, letting him breathe, another sound broke through the quiet. She slowed as she passed the conference room. Through the half-open door, Vanessa's voice carried low and sharp. "Yes, Mr. Vale, don't worry, Damien won't see it coming." His thumb brushed over the faded image, lingering. "I've lived every day with the guilt of not being there for her," he whispered. Then his eyes flicked to Grace. But what if she didn't die like they said? What if something else happened? Grace's breath caught. "Do you think Vanessa showing up last night was random?" Damien turned to her, startled. "What are you saying?" Grace's voice lowered, steady but tense. "I think someone's afraid you're remembering things you were never meant to." Damien looked at her, startled. That night, Grace left the hospital alone. The parking lot was too quiet, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she walked toward her car. Halfway there, she froze. Footsteps echoed behind her. She quickened her pace. The steps followed. Her breath caught. She turned sharply. The lot was empty. Only her car stood waiting, and on the windshield, a single envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside, one typed line stared back. "Stop digging. Some things stay buried." Grace's stomach twisted. She looked around again, but whoever had left it was already gone. The next morning, Vanessa was waiting in the hospital lobby. Flawless in a sharp black dress, she moved like she owned the place. Her eyes swept over Grace with a dismissive smile. "You should be careful, Grace," she murmured, her perfume heavy in the air. "Men like Damien don't save women like you." She turned and walked away before Grace could answer. Back at the office the next day, the atmosphere was tense. News had spread about Margaret's hospitalization, though no one dared ask questions. Damien didn't show up. but Grace did. She spent the day organizing files, catching up on the inbox, answering the phone with her usual calm, until she noticed something strange. An envelope on her desk. No name, no handwriting. Inside it, a single note typed in cold, even letters. "This is your final warning. Stop digging, or the consequences won't be yours alone." She stared at it, a chill running down her spine. Grace didn't scare easily, but this felt personal, deliberate. She picked up her phone and called Damien immediately. "Someone left a threat on my desk." She didn't sugarcoat it. Damien's voice on the other end was sharp. "What did it say?" She read it aloud. Dead silence. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he said. By the time Damien stormed into the office, Grace had already shown the note to security. The cameras had been mysteriously disabled for 20 minutes earlier that morning. No sign of who had come in or out. "This is no longer about memories," Damien said, pacing his office. "This is about control. Someone doesn't want the truth coming out." Grace stood near the window, arms crossed tightly. "Then we have to figure out who." Damien looked at her. "And if it's someone close to us?" Her voice didn't waver. "Then they'll regret underestimating you." Something in him softened. "I'm not used to people standing with me like this." Grace stepped forward. "You've been standing alone for too long." A long pause passed between them. Then Damien reached out, slowly, cautiously, and touched her hand. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Not just of what I'll find, but of losing this. Losing you." Grace's heart nearly broke. "You won't," she whispered. But before the moment could settle, her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. Just 2 words. "Ask her." Below it, an attached image. A grainy surveillance photo of Margaret 5 years ago, handing a sealed envelope to a man outside a hospital. Damien stared at the image on Grace's phone. His mother, 5 years ago, outside a hospital, handing an envelope to a man in a dark coat and cap. The photo was blurry, likely from a CCTV camera. The man's face was turned away, but his build was clear, tall, lean, middle-aged. He took the envelope like he was expecting it. "Who sent this?" Damien asked, his voice lower than usual, almost like he didn't want to wake the storm building inside him. Grace looked at the number. No name, no info. "Blocked," she said, and the message said, "Ask her." They both looked at each other. Margaret. They arrived at the hospital that evening, just as visiting hours were closing. Margaret was awake, alert, more so than the last time. Her eyes tracked Damien the moment he walked into the room. Grace hung back by the door while he sat beside his mother. "Hey, Mom," he said gently, brushing a strand of silver hair from her forehead. "You remember Grace, right?" Margaret's eyes drifted toward Grace. Then, faintly, she smiled. "She's kind?" Grace stepped forward and took her hand. "I'm glad you're feeling better." Margaret squeezed back weakly. "I dreamt about you." Damien leaned in. "Mom, there's something I need to ask." She looked at him, her eyes clear, clearer than he'd seen in a long time. "5 years ago," he began, "were you at a hospital with a man? You gave him something, an envelope." At first she didn't react. Then her body stiffened, and her mouth trembled. "You saw that?" "Someone sent us a photo." Her hand tightened around Grace's. Her voice dropped. "I wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't live with it anymore." Damien's pulse raced. Live with what? She looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. Emily didn't die in that fire. The world went silent. Grace gasped. Damien's heart stopped. Her words echoed in the room like thunder, leaving only silence in their wake. Damien felt the ground slip beneath him, his grief rewritten in a single breath. Grace's chest tightened, her pulse unsteady. For one fragile heartbeat, the world stood still, and then the storm found them. "What?" he said, barely breathing. Margaret blinked fast. Her words rushed now, like her strength was draining with every confession. They said she was lost in an accident, but the truth was hidden. They made me believe she was gone. But months later, I learned the truth. She wasn't dead. She was given a new identity without our knowledge. They said she had to be relocated for our protection, but they never intended to let us see her again. Adoption? Damien repeated, stunned. She said Emily had been taken, not killed, that someone wanted her gone for good. Grace knelt beside them, her voice tight. But why? Who would do that? Margaret looked at Damien, her face streaked with tears. Because of you. He pulled back, shocked. Me? Margaret's lips trembled, her voice weak at first, but then... For a brief moment, clear. They told me. She died. A fire. A lie. Her breath shook. They said you had just been chosen for the program, that a scandal would ruin you, that I was too unstable. She gripped Grace's hand, eyes glistening. A new life for Emily, away from us. The words faded as her strength slipped, leaving only silence again. Grace's hand went to her mouth. Damien shook his head, standing up. That's impossible. You would never have agreed to that. Margaret sobbed. I didn't. I fought it. But they said it was already done, that she'd been placed. I begged to see her, just once. They said no. But years later, I found out where she'd been. Who had her? She pointed to her chest. That envelope, it was everything I knew. I gave it to a journalist. A man who promised to keep digging if anything ever happened to me. Damien's voice shook. Why didn't you tell me? Margaret's eyes pleaded. I wanted to, but by the time I had the courage, the stroke took everything. I couldn't speak, and when I could again, you were too far gone, buried in your grief. Damien turned to the wall, fists clenched, blinking back tears. Grace whispered, Do you remember his name? The journalist? Margaret nodded faintly. Peter Langston. Back at the penthouse later that night, Damien sat in silence, a whiskey glass untouched on the table in front of him. Grace was beside him on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, hair down, a blanket draped over both of them. Neither had spoken in 10 minutes. Finally, Damien whispered, I grieved her. For years. Grace's eyes softened. His eyes. And now? She might be out there. I don't know how to live with that, he said. I buried her. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. You didn't fail her. You were lied to. That's different. He looked at her, eyes rimmed with red. You've stayed through all of this. I didn't even think about leaving, she said simply. He reached for her hand, squeezed it tightly, then whispered, Grace, I think I'm falling. Grace's lips parted, her eyes searching his. For a second it felt like the world held its breath with them. The shrill ring of his phone shattered the moment. Damien swore under his breath, pulling away to answer. His voice was rough with frustration. What? The reply was a low, distorted whisper that made his blood run cold. If you want to see the truth for yourself, come to 1107 Laurel Street alone. The line went dead. Damien stared at the screen, his jaw tight. His pulse thundered in his ears. Grace leaned forward. Who was it? He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his face pale. I don't know, but we're going. The address led them to a small, dimly lit bookstore in the old quarter of the city. The sign on the window said, Langston and Press. Rare finds since 1986. Damien's hands were shaking as they pushed the door open. Inside it smelled like dust and time, and behind the counter stood a man in his 60s, thin, weathered face, round glasses, and a cane leaning against the desk. He looked up slowly. Damien Cole. Damien stepped forward. Peter Langston? He nodded. I was wondering when you'd come. Why now? Grace asked. Peter gave a sad smile. Because someone's cleaning up the past, and I have just enough time to hand you the pieces before they erase it all. He reached under the counter and placed a thin, locked file onto the table. On the label, a name written in bold letters, Emily Cole, placement file. Damien stared at the folder on the counter. His name, and hers, printed clearly on the label like some forgotten relic no one was ever supposed to read again. Emily Cole, placement file. He reached for it slowly, his fingers hesitant, trembling. "Before you open it," Peter Langston said, leaning heavily on his cane, "you should know. This file cost lives." Grace looked at the old journalist, startled. "What do you mean?" Peter adjusted his glasses. "I started investigating after Margaret gave me the envelope. It didn't take long to realize Emily's death was staged, a falsified report. No fire, no injury, no autopsy. Nothing in the system matched the truth." Damien's voice was low. "Why would someone go to those lengths?" Peter hesitated, then pointed to the file. "Because this girl wasn't placed into a foster home. She was illegally relocated under a false identity." Grace gasped. Damien froze. Peter continued, voice heavy. "High-profile child placements, under-the-table arrangements. Wealthy couples who didn't want to wait for legal adoptions. Your sister was one of dozens taken through a shadow branch of a real agency, one tied to a name you might know." He pulled out a faded business card from the folder and handed it to Damien. Damien's eyes narrowed. "Vale Holdings," Peter nodded. "Your former business partner, Ian Vale. His uncle was one of the founders of the agency, quietly pulled strings for years." Damien's jaw clenched. "Ian never told me." "Of course not," Peter said. "Why ruin the golden boy image?" Grace leaned forward. "Is Emily still alive?" Peter hesitated for just a second. "Possibly." He opened the file. Inside were scanned documents, signatures, and at the bottom, a photo. Emily, age 12. Taken in 2012, just before she vanished. Her smile wide, her curls untamed, a face Damien had buried in grief, now alive on the page. Standing next to a woman in sunglasses and a man in a gray suit outside what looked like a mansion. A timestamp on the bottom, August 2012. Damien dropped into the nearest chair, his breath caught. "Why now?" he asked, voice hollow. "Why is this coming back now?" Peter lowered his voice. "Because someone is tying up loose ends. Someone in your circle is nervous you're getting close." He glanced at Grace. "And someone near you may already be working against you." Back at Damien's penthouse, the air was thick with tension. Damien sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the photo of Emily. He ran his thumb across the image, over her face like he could touch her through time. Grace sat beside him. Quiet, but alert, finally he spoke. "I don't know how to feel. Relief maybe, rage, guilt. All of it at once." "She's out there," Grace said softly, "and she might be waiting for you just like you've been waiting for her." Damien looked up, something raw behind his eyes. "I don't even know if she remembers me." "She will." Their eyes locked. And in that moment something passed between them, quiet, powerful. Grace reached forward and gently placed her hand over his. "Even if everything else changes, you still have me." He didn't pull away. He held on tightly. The next morning, Damien showed up at the office for the first time in days. No suit today. Just a dark jacket and an old watch he hadn't worn in years, the one Emily had given him as a birthday gift when she was 5. He walked straight into the boardroom. Ian Vale was already there, sipping coffee, calm as ever. Damien dropped the folder onto the table. Ian raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Something you were hoping I'd never see." Ian flipped it open, scanning the documents inside. He took his time, but his face didn't change. When he looked up, there wasn't surprise. There was calculation. "So, you found out. That you lied, that Emily was taken because of people you work with. That your family profited off her placement." Ian leaned back slowly in his chair. "We all do things to survive, Damien. This was business." Damien's voice cracked with fury. She was 6. Ian's voice turned ice cold. And now she's someone else's daughter. You want to rip her life apart just because of your guilt? The silence that followed felt like an explosion. Damien stood slowly. I want to find my sister, and I'll risk everything I built. Ian's smile faded. So be it. That afternoon, Grace received a package at the office. No name, no note. Inside, a single red USB drive. She plugged it into her laptop and opened the only file it contained, a video. It showed a girl, now a young woman, maybe 17, sitting on a garden bench with a sketchbook. The camera zoomed slowly. Her face came into view, and Grace gasped. Because she had Emily's eyes. Just as she went to call Damien, her screen flickered. The video disappeared, replaced by one line of text. She doesn't know who she is. Don't ruin it. The screen had gone black. Grace stared at the USB still plugged into her laptop, her pulse hammering in her ears. She hit every key, tried every folder, refreshed. Nothing. The video was gone. So was the girl, the one with Emily's eyes. Her phone rang. Damien? She didn't even say hello. I saw her, Grace breathed. On a video. She's alive, Damien. What? His voice cracked through the line. A girl. 17, maybe 18. She looks exactly like Emily, but what? She didn't seem to know who she was. She was sketching, smiling, happy. But someone was filming her, and they sent me a message. Grace paused, then read the last words aloud, her voice shaking. She doesn't know who she is. Don't ruin it. Within an hour, they were back at Peter Langston's bookshop. Peter watched the footage Grace had managed to recover, just a blurry still frame captured before the video disappeared. He studied the trees behind the girl, the bench, the statue in the background. This park, he mumbled, zooming in. That's not in the city. Grace leaned over his shoulder. You recognize it? Looks like Jefferson Grove. It's a private residential estate, gated, old money. Damien's heart dropped. Ian's family owns property there. Peter nodded. Then that's where we start. That night, Damien and Grace stood outside the gates of Jefferson Grove, staring at the elegant ironwork and the long, winding path inside. A security guard watched them from the booth, bored and half asleep. Damien turned to Grace. You don't have to come with me. I know. But if this gets worse, she stepped closer. Her eyes met his. I'm already in it, and I'm not leaving. A breath passed between them, and for the first time, Damien didn't hold back. He reached up slowly, brushing her hair behind her ear, and whispered, You've changed everything. Grace felt her heart lift and twist all at once. She leaned in. He didn't rush. He just held her face gently in his hands and kissed her, softly, slowly, like he'd waited his whole life and didn't want to get it wrong. And in that one moment, on that quiet sidewalk beneath city lights and secrets, Damien Cole was just a man in love. They didn't sneak in that night, not yet. Peter advised patience, surveillance, proof. So the next day, Grace returned to work like nothing had changed. But everything had. She saw the eyes of co-workers watching her. Curious now, some even sympathetic. Rumors were still flying about Margaret, the dinner, Vanessa's visit, and yet for the first time, Grace didn't care. She glanced at Damien across the room. He wasn't looking at her, but she felt the weight of his presence anyway, steady, unshaken. Her lips curved into the smallest smile before she caught herself, because she knew something real was happening. With Damien, with the truth, with Emily. But just as she was beginning to breathe, Vanessa walked into the office, again, unannounced. Bold, wearing all black this time. Grace stood up from her desk. You're not welcome here. Vanessa smiled coolly. Relax, I'm not here for him. I'm here for you. Grace didn't flinch. Then say what you came to say. Vanessa stepped closer, voice low. You don't know what you're doing. Damien's playing hero now, but he doesn't understand the cost of digging up the past. Grace's voice didn't waver. I know exactly who he is, and I'm not leaving him." Vanessa's smile thinned. Her tone turned sharper. "Colder. That girl you're both looking for? She has a new name, a new life, and new parents. People who paid very good money to make sure she stayed gone. You show up now, and you'll destroy her world." Grace's breath caught. Vanessa stepped back. "You think you're helping him, but you're both chasing ghosts. And if you're not careful, the past will swallow you too." She left without waiting for a response, and Grace stood there, shaken. That night, Damien and Grace met again at the penthouse. This time, everything between them felt different. There was no hesitation, no pretending. They held each other longer, sat closer, spoke softer, but something still hung between them, that message. "She doesn't know who she is. Don't ruin it." Grace finally asked the question neither of them wanted to say out loud. What if they're right? Damien looked at her. "If she's happy, do we really have the right to change that?" He stared at the ceiling for a long moment before answering. "When I was 8, Emily got lost in the park. I found her crying under a slide. She didn't know where she was or how to get back, but the moment she saw me," his voice faltered, "she ran into my arms like I was her whole world. That's who we were." Grace blinked fast, trying not to cry. Damien's voice dropped lower. "If she's out there, and she needs me, I'm going to find her." 2 nights later, Peter texted them, "I found her name, her new identity. Meet me at the cafe, midnight. Come alone." But when Grace and Damien arrived, Peter wasn't there. Only a black folder left on the table, and one final note, too close. "They found me. Her name is Lily Harmon. They live at 63 Rose Hill Lane, but you didn't get this from me." As Damien and Grace drove in silence toward Rose Hill Lane, headlights cutting through the dark, the tension built with every turn. But just as they reached the last street, a black SUV appeared out of nowhere and forced them off the road. The impact came like thunder. Glass shattered, metal twisted. Damien's car spun once, twice, before slamming into a tree on the edge of the road, then silence. Smoke drifted from the hood. The headlights flickered. Somewhere nearby, a car engine roared away into the night. Whoever hit them didn't stay. Inside, Grace's ears rang. Her vision was blurred. The scent of gasoline and scorched rubber stung her nose. "Damien?" No answer. Her fingers shook as she reached for him. His head was leaning against the steering wheel, blood trailing down his temple. "Damien!" she cried out, louder this time. Finally he stirred, groaning. Grace exhaled in relief, her hand trembling as it touched his face. "You're okay. You're alive." He blinked, slowly sitting back, wincing. What happened? We were rammed? Someone hit us on purpose?" He looked at her, blood streaking down the side of his face. His voice came out hoarse. "Are you hurt?" "I don't think so," her voice cracked. "But we have to move." She looked through the cracked windshield. The road was empty again. The other car had vanished. "I think they wanted to scare us," she whispered, "or stop us." Damien reached for the black folder, still wedged between the seat and the console, crushed, but still intact. The note inside was still legible. "Her name is Lily Harmon, 63 Rose Hill Lane." And that address suddenly felt dangerous, because someone didn't want them to find it. The hospital visit was quick and quiet. Damien refused to stay overnight, despite the concussion and fractured ribs. Grace had bruises along her arms and legs, but no major injuries. The moment she was cleared, she walked straight into his room. "Are you still thinking about going?" she asked gently. He didn't even hesitate. "She's there? Then I'm with you," she said. She sat beside his bed, her hand in his, and whispered, "I'm not letting them take another piece of you." Damien looked at her, eyes tired, broken but burning with something deep. "I've never needed anyone like I need you." Grace didn't speak. She just held him tighter. The next day, with bandages still wrapped around his ribs, Damien and Grace drove quietly through a wealthy suburban district nestled outside the city, 63 Rose Hill Lane. It was real. A large stone house with white shutters, a curved driveway, and perfectly trimmed hedges. Peaceful, elegant, and entirely unsuspecting. They parked across the street and waited. And then she appeared. Out the front door stepped a young woman, 17, maybe 18, curly brown hair tied loosely. A satchel over one shoulder. She laughed as she waved goodbye to someone inside the house. Grace grabbed Damien's hand. "Is that—" Damien couldn't move. He couldn't speak. Because it was her, the girl from the video, older, taller, but still with the same eyes. Emily, alive, smiling, and walking away with a freedom he hadn't felt in decades. They followed her quietly, not to stalk, but to protect. She walked a few blocks, then into a small community art center. Grace followed her in, while Damien waited outside, heart in his throat. Inside, Grace watched from a distance as Emily joined a group of students in a painting workshop. She laughed. She joked. She was talented, confident. Grace stood frozen in the doorway, because this wasn't a girl who looked lost. This was a girl who looked happy. Back outside, she found Damien leaning against the car, pain flickering in his eyes. "Well?" he asked. Grace hesitated. "She's okay," she said softly. "Okay. She doesn't seem like someone who's missing anything." Damien looked down, his jaw clenched. "What do I do?" Grace didn't answer right away, because the truth was cruel. "If you walk in there, Mada, and tell her everything, you'll take the life she's built and shatter it." His voice cracked. "But she's my sister." "I know." Silence. Then Damien whispered, "Do I have the right to ruin her peace just to heal my own pain?" Grace reached up, cupped his face gently. "You don't have to choose today. But if I don't tell her, am I protecting her or just giving up?" Grace's voice softened, her heart breaking for him. "You're doing what you always do, trying to protect someone else at your own expense." He blinked slowly, then asked the question he'd buried since the moment he saw her. What if she doesn't want me? They sat in the car for hours that evening, parked under a pale sunset sky, saying nothing at all. Damien kept his eyes on the front steps of the art center, waiting for her to come out again. She eventually did, holding her sketchbook, waving goodbye to a friend, completely unaware of the man watching her from across the street. His chest ached. But Grace's hand in his grounded him. At one point he whispered, "She looks like our mom did when she was young." Grace smiled faintly. "She has your mouth," he chuckled quietly. "Poor kid." They both laughed. But it faded, because no matter how much they smiled, they both knew they were standing at a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Just as they started the car to leave, Grace's phone buzzed. A new message, no number, just a photo. Margaret unconscious in her hospital bed, monitors beside her, fragile. Still. And one line of text, "Leave her alone, or this time, she won't wake up." Grace's breath caught. Damien grabbed the phone, eyes burning with rage. "I'm done being quiet." The message sat on Grace's screen like a threat carved in stone. "Leave her alone, or this time, she won't wake up." A photo of Margaret. Unconscious, her fragile body surrounded by wires and machines. A warning, clear and cruel. Grace stared at it, her breath caught in her chest. Damien didn't speak for a long moment. Then he gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "This ends tonight." His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was absolute. Grace placed her hand gently on his arm. "We need to think, not rush. Whoever did this knows I'm getting too close, and they're scared." He turned to her. "They've used my mother, my sister. They tried to hurt you. They've taken everything from me." Then, softer, "I'm not letting them take Emily too." They drove straight to the hospital. Margaret was still alive, but unconscious. her heart rate slower than it had been the day before. The nurse said it might be stress or trauma or a trigger. Damien stood by her bedside, silent. He brushed her silver hair away from her face and whispered, "They tried to scare me, Mom, but they forgot something." Grace stood in the doorway, watching, her heart pounding. Damien leaned close, resting his forehead gently against Margaret's. "You raised a fighter." Back in the penthouse, the rain had begun to fall, light at first, then heavier. It tapped softly on the windows like a ticking clock counting down to something neither of them could stop. Grace sat at the kitchen island, her laptop open. "I traced the photo metadata," she said. "It was taken today, at the hospital, which means whoever sent it had access to your mother's room." Damien paced the room, thinking. Security, janitors, admin staff, or someone closer? Damien froze. His eyes landed on his desk. On a name, Ian Vale. Grace followed his gaze. "You think it's him? Who else would want to keep this buried? Who else has the money, the reach, and the motive?" He picked up his phone and dialed. "Ian." There was a pause on the other end. "Damien, you sound upset. Save it." Ian's voice changed. Instantly colder. "You went to Rose Hill." "I saw her." Ian exhaled like he already knew. "She's not your sister anymore. She's not yours to protect." "No," Ian replied, "but I can still protect the world she lives in. You tear it apart now, and she'll be caught in the rubble." Damien's voice dropped to a whisper. "You threatened my mother." A pause. "Prove it." "I will." Then Damien hung up. By midnight, Damien had called in every favor he had left. Private investigators, former journalists, security footage experts. Everything Ian Vale had ever touched, companies, hospitals, trusts, charities, was being ripped open. And while the digital war began behind the scenes, Grace and Damien began preparing for something more human. They were going to see Lily, Emily, face to face. No more shadows, no more whispers. The next day, Grace returned alone to the art center. Lily was sitting alone this time on a bench near the window. Sketching, Grace approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hey," she said softly. Lily looked up, curious. "Hi? Can I help you?" Grace smiled gently. "You don't know me, but I know someone who used to draw just like that." Lily tilted her head. "Weird pickup line." Grace laughed, nervous. "Sorry, that came out strange. I've been looking for someone." "A girl, with your eyes, your laugh." Lily shifted slightly. Grace hesitated. "I'm not here to scare you or hurt you. I just want to ask you something." Lily frowned but didn't run. "Do you ever feel like there's something missing?" Grace asked. "Like there's a part of you that got edited out?" Lily stared at her, still, uncertain. "I used to," she said slowly. "When I was younger. Do you remember your life before the Harmons?" Lily looked down at her sketchbook. "No one's ever asked me that before." Grace sat beside her on the bench. I'm asking now," Lily hesitated. "I used to have dreams of a little boy holding my hand. I thought maybe he was my imaginary friend. But sometimes I wake up crying and I don't know why." Grace swallowed hard. That boy might be real. Lily's voice cracked slightly. "Who are you?" Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a photo, the one of Emily at age 6, with Damien holding her beside the gravestone. She handed it to her gently. Lily took it. Her hands began to shake. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "That's me." Tears began to well in her eyes. "And that boy, he's not imaginary." Grace's voice trembled. "He's your brother, Damien." Lily dropped the photo. Her hands flew to her mouth. "I don't understand. I was adopted when I was 7. My parents said my real family died in a fire." "They lied." Grace's heart was racing. "You were taken, given a new identity. They told Damien and your mother you were dead. And now, he's here. He just wants to see you." Lily's eyes filled with tears. I don't remember him. You don't have to. Just meet him. For a moment, Lily sat frozen. Then she nodded, terrified, uncertain but brave. Okay. Outside, Damien waited by the fountain across the street. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung low. Grace returned first, her face pale. She's coming. He stood, and then, a few steps behind Grace, Lily appeared. She walked slowly. Damien didn't move, not at first. He just stared, eyes wide, heart cracking open with every step she took. When she finally stopped a few feet away, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I don't remember you, she said. Voice trembling. He nodded, lips trembling. I remember you enough for both of us. She hesitated, then took one step closer, and then another, until she was right in front of him. He reached out, slowly, and she didn't pull away. And when their hands touched, something shifted in her face. Recognition, memory, a ghost? She didn't know, but she whispered, You feel like home. And then she hugged him, tight, desperate, like she didn't understand why, but her heart did. Damien broke, right there, tears streaming down his face as he held his sister again for the first time in 11 years. And Grace watched, silent. Tears in her eyes, too, because this wasn't just a reunion. It was the moment two broken hearts found each other again. But across the street, in a black car with tinted windows, Ian Vale was watching and dialing a number. They found her, he said. It's done. Then hung up and drove away. The next morning, the city felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just more awake. Like something had shifted in the world that couldn't be undone. Grace stood at the window of Damien's penthouse, watching sunlight pour over the skyline. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a peace behind them. Behind her, Damien and Lily sat on the couch, a blanket wrapped around both of them. Neither had spoken much since the night before. Words weren't needed. She leaned her head on his shoulder, still unsure, still overwhelmed, but safe. And for now, that was enough. Later that day, they visited Margaret. They visited. Her breathing was steady, her eyes were closed, but her hand twitched faintly when Lily walked in. Grace stayed at the door, giving them space. Damien guided his sister to the edge of the bed. Mom, he whispered, she's here. Lily reached out slowly and placed her hand over Margaret's. For a moment, nothing. Then Margaret's eyes fluttered and opened. She looked up at them both and smiled, not wide, not loud, but deep, like her heart had finally come home. Emily, she whispered, and Lily, trembling, whispered back, Hi, Mom. Margaret began to cry, no words, just tears. Tears that healed, tears that forgave. And for the first time in over a decade, the Cole family wasn't broken anymore. It was healing. 3 weeks later, everything changed. Ian Vale resigned quietly. The investigation, launched from Peter Langston's files, led to arrests, leaked documents, and closed doors. The illegal adoption network that had operated under false agencies for over a decade was finally exposed. Ian's name was never mentioned publicly, not enough evidence. But he vanished from the business world overnight. And Damien? He handed over full control of his company. He walked into the same boardroom where his empire had begun and told the partners, I built this place for all the wrong reasons. Now I'm building something better. He founded a foundation instead. The Emily Grace Foundation. For children lost in the system, for families who never gave up, for hope that refuses to die. Lily didn't remember everything, not yet, but she visited Margaret every week, played piano again, and started using both names, Lily Harmon and Emily Cole. She even moved into her own small apartment nearby, not quite ready to come home, but close enough to feel connected. She drew every day, painted, smiled more, and on her 18th birthday, she asked Damien to walk her down the stage at her art school exhibit. "I may not remember everything," she whispered, "but I know who you are now." He hugged her, holding back tears. "That's all I ever needed." And Grace? She stayed, not just with the foundation, not just by Damien's side. She became part of the story, the quiet thread that had held all the broken pieces together, with her kindness, her steadiness, and her refusal to walk away when things got hard. One evening, months later, Damien took her to the same rooftop where they once had dinner with Margaret. Now restored, covered in lights, lined with plants, he held her hands, looked her in the eyes, and said, "I thought I lost everything, but the day I brought my mother into the office, I found you." Grace smiled, tears in her eyes. "You didn't just find me, you let me in." And there, under the stars, he asked her to stay. Not just for one night, but for a lifetime. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Because some love stories aren't about falling fast. They're about healing slow, about choosing each other again and again, and about becoming home for someone who's been searching a long time. 1 year later, a small art gallery. Soft music, framed sketches lining every wall. One painting stands at the center, a child with curly hair, holding hands with a tall boy. A woman behind them, smiling. The plaque reads, "Found Again," by Emily Cole, and beneath it a small note, "For the brother who never stopped looking, for the woman who held us together, and for every lost soul still waiting to be seen." And as people walk by the painting, some cry, some smile, and some see their own story, because healing is never quiet, and love, when true, is never really lost. The end. Now it's your turn. What would you do if someone you loved came back into your life but didn't remember you at all? Would you fight to remind them, or let them be happy where they are? Tell us in the comments. Your story might just help someone else heal. And if this story touched your heart in any way, leave a like, subscribe for more stories like this, and rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. I'd love to know how it made you feel. You matter, your voice matters, and your presence here means more than you know. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.